1960 marked a turning point for Hollywood that few could have predicted. While we remember the decade for iconic films, the dawn of the 60s brought financial devastation to some of the industry's biggest studios. Behind the glamorous premieres, executives were panicking as millions of dollars vanished. The golden era was cracking, and these 13 films represent the costliest miscalculations in an industry desperate to compete with television. From technological gimmicks to overinflated salaries, these productions all hemorrhaged money at an alarming rate. What makes these failures fascinating is that many featured Hollywood's biggest stars, legendary directors, and massive budgets. Some have been entirely forgotten, while others later found redemption. Let's dive into the financial wreckage that nearly sank several major studios and changed how Hollywood approached risk. When Ava Gardner and Dirk Bogarde signed on to star in The Angel Wore Red, MGM had high hopes for this religious drama set during the Spanish Civil War. Yet somehow, this film became one of the most obscure financial disasters of 1960. The story centered on a priest who abandons his vows, falling in love with a dancer while protecting a religious relic. With controversial themes, the studio expected intense interest. What they got was near total indifference. Production suffered from script problems that created confusing storylines and a marketing campaign that couldn't decide whether to promote it as a war film, romance, or religious epic. Audience members often left confused or disappointed. The film disappeared from theaters so quickly that insiders refer to it as the film that vanished. Its box office returns were so abysmal that MGM barely acknowledged its existence in year-end reports. Despite having two major stars, it's now among the least remembered films of either actor's career. But this disappointment was just the beginning of Hollywood's disastrous year. At least, The Angel Wore Red failed in conventional ways. Our next film tried something that literally made audiences sick. If ever there was a film that proved innovation alone can't save a weak story, it was Scent of Mystery. This thriller has secured its place in cinema history for being the first and last major film to use smell-o-vision, a technology that proved as disastrous as it was ambitious. Producer Mike Todd Jr. invested millions in this system that would release specific scents into theaters. The idea was revolutionary. Audiences would smell coffee when characters drank it, pipe tobacco when the villain appeared, and perfumes essential to the mystery plot. The technology required installing equipment under every theater seat at $25 to $30 per seat, when movie tickets cost less than $1. Only 3 theaters in America were equipped for this experiment. When the film premiered, the results were disastrous. Scents often arrived seconds after their corresponding scenes, creating confusion. Some reported smelling nothing, while others complained of headaches from the mixture of aromas. The Chicago Tribune called it a stunt that stinks. The film was quickly re-edited, renamed Holiday in Spain, and re-released without any sense, erasing its only unique selling point. The combined costs were never recouped, making it one of the most expensive experiments in cinema history. While some films failed due to risky technology, others collapsed under the weight of artistic ambition and budget excesses. Columbia Pictures had every reason to believe Song Without End would be a prestige hit. This biographical film about composer Franz Liszt featured beautiful music, extravagant costumes, and talented Dirk Bogarde. Yet almost everything went wrong. The production was plagued with problems from the start. Original director Charles Vidor died during filming, requiring George Cukor to step in. The budget ballooned to over $7 million as elaborate European locations and authentic period details drove costs skyward. The music sequences consumed massive screen time, testing audience patience. Critics noted the thinness of the actual story compared to the extended musical performances. The New York Times called it handsomely mounted, but dramatically inert. When final box office numbers came in, Columbia faced a shocking reality. Audiences simply weren't interested in spending 2 hours watching classical piano performances. The film earned back less than half its budget, becoming one of the studio's biggest disappointments. This pattern of star-studded flops continued with our next entry, proving that even the most reliable box office draws weren't immune to the curse of 1960. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were Hollywood's golden couple. When 20th Century Fox cast them in From the Terrace, an adaptation of John O'Hara's best-selling novel, success seemed guaranteed. Instead, the film became a cautionary tale about the limits of star power. The story of an ambitious man who sacrifices his marriage for career advancement seemed perfect for 1960. But what worked on page translated into a sluggish, overlong film that tested audience endurance. Viewers complained about the slow pacing and meandering plot. Director Mark Robson clashed with Newman over character interpretation, creating tension on set. The budget expanded as filming stretched beyond schedule, with expensive location shoots driving costs upward. Marketing further confused matters. Some materials positioned it as a steamy romance, others emphasized social commentary. This mixed messaging left viewers unclear about what type of film they were seeing. The final results stunned executives. Despite the Newman-Woodward star power, the film barely broke even. Its failure sent a clear message: even the biggest stars couldn't save a film that didn't connect with audiences. The next disaster proved that even divine intervention couldn't save a biblical epic from box office damnation. Biblical epics had been reliable moneymakers throughout the 1950s, with films like The Ten Commandments breaking box office records. When 20th Century Fox greenlit The Story of Ruth, they expected similar results. Instead, they received a painful lesson about changing audience tastes. Unlike previous religious epics, Fox made the questionable decision to cast unknowns rather than stars. Israeli actress Elena Eden took the title role. The studio believed the biblical story itself would be the draw, but audiences accustomed to seeing Charlton Heston stayed away. The production spared no expense, with enormous sets recreating ancient Moab and Bethlehem, hundreds of extras, and elaborate costumes. The budget climbed steadily as director Henry Koster demanded authenticity in every detail. When The Story of Ruth premiered, critics gave it lukewarm reviews, noting its reverent but sluggish storytelling. The real disaster came at the box office, where it earned back less than half its budget. Audience tastes had shifted, and the religious epic that had seemed like a safe investment became a significant liability. Fox executives acknowledged a painful truth: the reliable formulas that had worked just years earlier were no longer connecting with audiences. But some directors refused to read these warning signs, as our next entry demonstrates. John Huston was one of Hollywood's most respected directors. Burt Lancaster and Audrey Hepburn were among the industry's biggest stars. On paper, their Western collaboration, The Unforgiven, should have been an easy success. Instead, it became one of the most troubled and expensive productions of 1960. Problems began when production moved to Mexico. Unpredictable weather caused constant delays. Then disaster struck when Hepburn fell from a horse, fracturing her back. Production shut down for weeks while she recovered, sending costs soaring. Behind the scenes, conflict brewed between Huston and producer James Hill over the film's handling of racial themes. The story centered on a family discovering their adopted daughter might be Native American, controversial territory for 1960. Huston wanted to lean into these themes, while the studio preferred a conventional Western. By completion, the budget had nearly doubled from initial projections. Critics praised performances, but found the film's message confused. Audiences seemed to agree, and it failed to recoup its inflated budget. What makes this failure notable is that Westerns were typically reliable performers in this era. For a Western with this star power to fail commercially signaled deeper problems in Hollywood's understanding of changing audience tastes. Pepe represented Columbia Pictures' attempt to capitalize on the international appeal of Mexican comedy star Cantinflas. The studio's strategy: surround him with as many Hollywood celebrities as possible in cameo roles. The result was one of the most expensive and least profitable films of 1960. The production featured an astounding 35-star cameos, including Frank Sinatra, Jimmy Stewart, and Jack Lemmon. Each appearance required separate negotiations and often special treatment. Some stars appeared for mere seconds, yet commanded substantial fees that bloated the budget to nearly $5 million. Director George Sidney structured the thin plot about a Mexican ranch hand following his beloved horse to Hollywood, as little more than a framework for celebrity appearances. The resulting film ran 3 hours, testing audience patience. Language barriers created additional problems. Cantinflas's comedy relied heavily on Spanish wordplay, which didn't translate well for American audiences. International versions required extensive redubbing. When Pepe premiered, critics were merciless. The New York Times called it a series of cameos in desperate search of a movie. Audiences quickly lost interest, and the film earned back less than half its enormous budget. Some studios were making even costlier mistakes with established properties, as our next disaster demonstrates. MGM had every reason to believe Cimarron would be a guaranteed success. The 1931 version had won Best Picture. For the 1960 remake, they spared no expense, creating an epic Western with massive sets and an impressive cast led by Glenn Ford. What they didn't anticipate was the stunning $3.6 million loss. Director Anthony Mann clashed with producers over the film's tone. The ambitious recreation of the 1889 Oklahoma land rush required enormous resources, with hundreds of riders and elaborate stunts. On-location shooting faced weather delays that sent costs spiraling. By completion, the budget had swelled to over $8 million, an enormous sum for 1960. MGM executives remained confident, believing the combination of Western action and star power would draw audiences. Marketing materials emphasized the film's epic scale. When Cimarron premiered, critics acknowledged its impressive visuals but found the story sluggish. More damaging was audience response. Ticket sales were alarmingly weak. The film earned just $2,325,000 domestically and $2,500,000 internationally, nowhere near enough to recoup its investment. The $3.6 million loss represented one of MGM's worst financial disasters and accelerated the studio's decline. But they weren't the only ones facing shocking failures from seemingly surefire projects. Marilyn Monroe remained Hollywood's biggest female star in 1960. When she was paired with French star Yves Montand in Let's Make Love under director George Cukor, 20th Century Fox expected a blockbuster. Instead, they got a production plagued by scandals, delays, and audience indifference. Trouble began with the script, which underwent numerous rewrites. Monroe frequently missed rehearsals and often arrived late to set. Production fell behind schedule, with each day adding thousands to the budget. Then came the scandal that overshadowed the film. Monroe and Montand began a highly publicized affair during filming, despite both being married. The tabloids had a field day, and publicity shifted from the film's content to the stars' personal lives. In a desperate attempt to salvage the production, the studio brought in additional writers and hired several uncredited directors to shoot specific scenes. These measures further inflated the budget. When the film premiered, critics and audiences found it disappointing. The chemistry that ignited off-screen failed to materialize on camera. Despite Monroe's star power, the film barely broke even, a devastating result for what should have been one of the year's biggest hits. Even science fiction, a genre gaining popularity, was immune to 1960s box office curse. H.G. Wells's novel, The Time Machine, seemed perfect source material for 1960s growing science fiction audience. MGM invested heavily in impressive special effects, including time-lapse sequences showing the passage of time. Yet, despite later becoming a beloved cult classic, its initial release was considered a significant financial disappointment. Director George Pal pushed the effects department to create sequences that would dazzle audiences. The Time Machine itself cost tens of thousands to build, and futuristic settings required extensive construction. Each element drove the budget upward, creating financial pressure. Marketing presented challenges. The studio wasn't sure whether to emphasize philosophical elements or position it as straightforward adventure. The resulting campaign sent mixed messages. Additionally, the film lacked major stars, relying instead on Rod Taylor and Alan Young. When The Time Machine premiered, critics praised its visual effects but found the story oversimplified from Wells' novel. Audience turnout fell far short of what the studio needed to recover its investment. The film failed to break even during its theatrical run, though television broadcasts would eventually make it profitable years later. This failure was particularly disappointing for MGM, coming in the same year as their Cimarron disaster. But they weren't alone in their miscalculations. Walt Disney had built an empire on understanding family entertainment, making his studio's failure with Pollyanna all the more surprising. Despite glowing reviews and a star-making performance from Hayley Mills, this wholesome story became one of Disney's biggest financial disappointments. Disney assembled an impressive supporting cast including Jane Wyman, Karl Malden, and Agnes Moorehead. The period setting required detailed sets and costumes, driving the budget higher than typical Disney live-action films. Walt took a personal interest, believing the film's positive message would resonate with all ages. Critics agreed, with many calling it Disney's best live-action film to date. The New York Times praised its unabashed sentiment. Mills even received a special Academy Juvenile Award for her performance. Yet, when the box office results came in, Pollyanna had earned less than half the projected $6 million. In a rare admission, Walt Disney later acknowledged the problem. "I think the picture would have done better with a different title. Girls and women went to it, but men tended to stay away because it sounded sweet and sticky." This marketing failure demonstrated that even acclaimed films could flop if potential audiences were turned off by their perception. But some failures eventually found redemption. Today, Spartacus is considered a classic, but in 1960, it represented a massive financial gamble that initially failed to pay off. Producer star Kirk Douglas invested enormous resources in this Roman epic directed by Stanley Kubrick, only to watch it miss its break-even point by approximately $1.7 million. The troubled production began when Douglas fired original director Anthony Mann after only 2 weeks. Bringing in Kubrick created tension, as director and star frequently clashed. The budget ballooned to $12 million as battle sequences required thousands of extras and extensive effects. Adding to the controversy, Douglas credited blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, effectively helping end Hollywood's notorious blacklist. This move alienated certain audience segments and created additional publicity challenges. The resulting 3-hour film received mixed reviews. While many praised its scope, others found it overlong and heavy-handed. The massive investment required equally massive ticket sales that failed to materialize immediately. What makes Spartacus unique among 1960s failures is its eventual redemption. Subsequent re-releases and television rights eventually pushed the film into profitability years later. By 1991, a restored version received acclaim as a masterpiece. But our final disaster offers no such happy ending. John Wayne had dreamed of making the Alamo for 15 years. When he couldn't secure full studio financing, he took an unprecedented personal risk, investing $1.5 million of his own money, mortgaging his houses, and putting up his vehicles as collateral. This passion project would become one of Hollywood's most notorious financial disasters. Wayne not only starred as Davy Crockett, but also directed, constructing a full-scale replica in Texas. The shoot stretched for 83 days, with thousands of extras and elaborate battle sequences driving the budget to $12 million, making it one of the most expensive films of its time. Wayne's inexperience as a director led to inefficiency and costly reshoots. The remote location created logistical challenges. Weather delays and script revisions further inflated costs. Wayne arranged a roadshow release with premium ticket prices and embarked on an extensive promotional tour. Critics delivered mixed reviews, questioning the historical accuracy and pacing of the 167-minute epic. The box office results were devastating, just $7.2 million, far short of the break-even point. For Wayne, this represented not just a commercial failure, but a personal financial crisis that forced him to take roles strictly for paychecks in subsequent years. Hollywood executives were stunned that a John Wayne Western could lose money, something previously thought impossible. 1960 stands as a watershed year when Hollywood's old formulas began to crumble. These 13 spectacular failures collectively lost tens of millions of dollars and signaled that audience tastes were changing in ways studios didn't understand. The lessons were painful but clear. Star power alone couldn't guarantee success. Expensive gimmicks like smell-o-vision couldn't compensate for weak storytelling. Even reliable genres like biblical epics and westerns were no longer automatic draws. What's fascinating is how these films are remembered today. Some, like Spartacus and The Time Machine, eventually found appreciation and profitability. Others, like The Angel Wore Red and Scent of Mystery, have been largely forgotten, except by cinema historians. These box office disasters forced Hollywood to reassess its approach. The studio system was already weakening, and these financial blows accelerated its transformation. The caution that followed would eventually give way to the creative revolution of the late 60s, when a new generation of filmmakers would reinvent American cinema. The next time you watch a classic from this era, remember these 13 cautionary tales that nearly bankrupted studios, ended careers, and changed Hollywood forever.